very distressing rise of hatred against Rania, and we turn into a topic that is 100 years old, died yesterday at his home in Connecticut. Well, we're going to keep moving forward here, Rania, and we turn into a topic that is, I think, been very much in the minds of many of us in the most recent days, and that is the very distressing rise of hatred against Palestinians, those perceived to be Palestinians, and Arabs and Muslims here in the United States in the context of the slaughter in Gaza. And we are very, very honored to be joined for this segment by Abed Ayoub, who's the executive director of the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee. Abed, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Well, it's an honor to have you here with us. And I guess I was just hoping to ask you first, I mean, obviously the shooting of these 3 young students in Vermont, I think has just been something that's captured all of us. But I wanted to start maybe by taking one step back. I mean, what have we really seen since October 7th in terms of increases or spikes in terms of discrimination against those that people perceive to be Arab Americans?
You know, it's been we have seen a drastic rise and an increase, but I want to say the numbers don't tell the full story, right? And I know we've had a lot of comparisons with post 9/11 and what we're seeing now. The main difference is in the types of attacks and the types of incidents that are targeting the community. Post 9/11, you had your regular, run-of-the-mill discrimination or hate, somebody being harassed at a supermarket or being bullied at school, and we're not minimizing those, but these are the types of things we saw in the community with the hate crimes. This time around, it's sophisticated and it's very planned. So the attacks against the community didn't just happen, organically. As there was a switch that turned on that began with trying to silence, doctors, attorneys, and professionals by going after them at the workplace, reaching out their employers to make an example out of them. So if they can make an example out of these professionals, get them fired. They wanted to, again, silence the community, put fear in the community, and then couple that with the language that was being used, the dehumanizing language that was being used, is still being used by a lot of the elected officials, including the president, during the early days of October, and the attack on our student groups. So we were getting and still getting hit in every direction. Yes, we can give you the numbers. There's been thousands of intakes between the major Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim organizations that we've counted. There's been hundreds of our community members that have been fired. But, the way these happen and the way they're happening is very problematic. And all of that culminates with the general public, the people that are watching all of this happening, dehumanizing us, thinking it's okay to speak this way or it's okay to hate Arabs, to hate Palestinians. That's why you have a 6-year-old in Chicago that was stabbed and killed, and his mother was also stabbed. That's why you have 3 Palestinian students, in Vermont who were shot, because the language and the climate is bad, and contributing to that is the way these attacks and the way these have been planned against us.
Abed, you've been working on this sort of thing for a very long time, and this does seem quite unprecedented. I mean, I'm not in the States, but just from what I've seen from abroad, it's quite shocking to witness some of the open displays of racism. But it's not just, you're mentioning that this is coming from somewhere, right? Like, obviously people are being incited because Arabs and Palestinians and Muslims are being dehumanized in the media, as well as by officials. I think it was really shocking to all of us to see this gentleman who in New York City was repeatedly going and harassing this cart vendor, knowing he was being videotaped, and just openly calling for more deaths of Palestinian children, saying that at that point 4,000 hadn't been enough. And it turned out he had worked for the State Department. And I could be wrong. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but up until now, I have not heard a condemnation for, I know he was ultimately arrested and charged, but I heard no condemnation from any official in the Biden administration or anybody who worked with him in the Obama administration. This wasn't just some middleman. This was somebody who was in charge of the Israeli-Palestinian file in the State Department at one point, I believe, under Obama. He had won several awards at the State Department. And I think this speaks to a really serious issue in the highest echelons of power in the United States. What are Arab Americans supposed to do under these circumstances when the people in charge of not just Republicans who we're used to hearing genocidal rhetoric from, but from Democrats who are always talking about inclusion and equality and diversity, when they're the ones also saying these things that are basically not only dismissing the fact that Arab Americans have a basic right to be treated as, citizens of their country with human rights, but also they're engaging in dehumanizing and in some cases you could say genocidal rhetoric.
You're right. You're absolutely right. There's been no condemnation from the State Department, the Obama administration, or anybody that we've heard of come out against this guy. And an important point you touched on: this is not only from the Republican Party or conservatives. This is the hate is coming from it's bipartisan hate. We're calling it, like, it's coming from all directions. It's not isolated to like one geographical area. You're seeing it happen in New York. You're seeing it happening in the South and in other parts of the country. So it is, again, it's not an isolated thing. And it's not, we are seeing it coming from Democrats that are contributing to this, and coming from, progressives and liberals that aren't really, willing to stand up with Palestinians, willing to stand up with Arabs, and are contributing to the rhetoric. The issue we had within a week or two, we immediately felt, or actually sooner than a week, like we felt abandoned, where a lot of the allies that were marching in 2017 with, going to the airports, and a lot of these larger, organizations based out here in DC that were ready to stand with the Muslim community, with the Arab community, they were nowhere to be found. They were silent and would not return phone calls, would not engage, even though we warned them about the impeding hate crimes. Everything started on October 7th. By October 8th or 9th, we were emailing all our partners, our government partners, saying hate crimes are going to rise. We're going to see some attacks against our community. We need to start working together to preempt this and get ahead of this. There was no responses. The only response, the only time we began receiving responses was when Wadea was stabbed in Chicago. That's when people realized, okay, this is this isn't BS. Things are really happening. We need to pay attention. But it's at that point it was already too late. It's already going, and it has not slowed down. We're seeing it happen again all over the country. We saw the shooting in Vermont this past weekend, and unfortunately, I believe we're going to see even more in the coming future targeting our community. So it's a tough time right now in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it really is amazing. And I mean, it seems to me also that there's an element of this that, well, one, it just strikes me as deeply paternalistic in some ways now, as sort of, people coming out now that the elections, it looks like people are saying, oh, we don't want to vote for this person or vote for that person. Now, all of a sudden, you see a lot of the politicians mouthing the words, oh, well, we're against this and we're against that. But it seems to me that one other issue here is, this to some degree is sort of, reality based. And so on the one hand, you have the Biden administration rolling out initiatives saying they're against Islamophobia, but still unwilling to really aggressively push for a ceasefire. And it almost seems that, in some ways they want to have their cake and eat it too. A lot of
Hold on.
You're still purchasing your lenses from your optometrist?
What are you doing? Come on.
rise to such a high degree. And it almost feels, to me, it just feels like for just myself during the 2020 uprising, when people say, well, we care so much about racism, but then they don't want to seriously address the issue of what the police are doing in our community. It feels like this is kind of a similar issue with how on the one hand, I'll say I'm against Islamophobia, against anti-Arab hate, but then on the same token, you want to say, but I'm actually 100% for this war continuing and this slaughter continuing in Gaza.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. And the rollout of the Islamophobia strategy, that's a whole other problem, which, you can have a whole show, dedicated to it, right? We know it was rolled out when the poll numbers started dropping. All of a sudden, you see this program rolled out that's been working on for a year. And then that program within itself even has issues. How is the U.S. government is one of the biggest perpetrators of Islamophobia. So how are they supposed to hold a countering Islamophobia measure when they're engaging in it regularly through their policies and through their implementations of different programs they have? And they're basically absolving themselves of any role by having this a strategy and trying to address it. Well, you have to look internally, and we know how you can get rid of Islamophobia. We know the programs you can remove and the rhetorics you can start changing and putting an end to these wars, and we can go on and on ways that can do that. So we don't see much value in the strategy, and in fact, it may be more, even more harmful to the community than helpful. But yes, the poll numbers start dropping. People now are starting to talk about the elections. But as we've been saying, I've been saying, publicly on my social media channels, it's kind of too late. I mean, 2024 is going to be a brutal year for Democrats. They've underestimated the impact this genocide is going to have on the community. Early on, I was told, directly that your community will forget, your community won't remember. Who are you going to vote for? Trump. Look at the alternative. But things like that don't scare the community anymore. Threatening with the Muslim ban, threatening with a lot of these policies, they don't have an impact on the community anymore. And it's going to be an interesting year next year.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious when we talk about the sort of anti-Arab hate that we're seeing. I mean, I think it's obviously a scale, right? So like on one side, you have the actual violent attacks against people. In this case, the 3 students who were shot in Vermont, the child that was stabbed in Chicago. These are like the very sort of serious sorts of hate crimes that you see get reported on. There's a lot that doesn't get reported on. Just to throw out an example, like I have a relative who, like, this isn't a hate crime, but it's just the harassment that people are dealing with. He's like a 13-year-old and he got called a terrorist by some white kids at school because he was trying to add some nuance to the conversation about what's happening in Palestine. So it's like, there's that, all the way to actual violence. So I'm just curious if you could, and then you mentioned firings, people being fired for just expressing support for Palestine. I'm curious if you can maybe break down a bit of the kinds of things that you're hearing that is being reported for the sort of anti-Arab harassment, bigotry, hate, violence that people in the Arab American community are dealing with right now.
Sure, and thank you. That was a good, kind of rundown and explanation that there are things that are not reported, things that don't make the headlines, and this is what we hear, and we hear, these examples daily. You have first on the college campuses the doxing of the students, the silencing of our student groups. You have a lot of students that are being pressured into redacting statements, taking posts down, and most times, the students don't want to deal with the headache, or they don't want to deal with, going through a process. They cave in. But that's been starting to change over the past few weeks. A lot of students are starting to fight back. They're starting to understand their rights, and they're starting to understand they can't be silenced. That's a good thing. The most troubling are the things that are happening in elementary schools and in high schools across the country on a very regular basis. And it's not from other students. Most of the times it's from other teachers. There's a local school district out here in the DC area where, teachers have made clearly anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian comments, but there's no reprimand. They're not held responsible for it. And the administration does anything they can to keep it quiet and, maybe issue an apology directly to the students, but won't address it publicly. Then in the workplace, you have, again, the targeting of employees, the firing of employees, people getting laid off. That is happening, often, or people being threatened, if you don't take this post on, you're going to be fired. It's just continuous. None of these are, they don't rise to the level like, wow, this is such crazy facts. They're all very similar in how they play out because it's very coordinated. It is very sophisticated. There is a game plan for this. It's well funded. It's all tied into, again, silencing us, identifying who we are, identifying who speaks up, going on LinkedIn, emailing their HR bosses or their direct supervisors, and then it just starts going from there. And it is happening daily, and it's going to continue happening.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you this before we let you go, because we know that people, as you said, are increasingly not allowing themselves to be silent. I know you guys at ADC are right there on the front lines of this. I mean, what are some of the things that people are doing to push back against this rise in hatred, and how can those who want to help intersect with those efforts?
Absolutely. The one thing we're doing, what we're starting to do is we have to be aggressive. We have to go on the offensive. That's why we've made a commitment to, hold those accountable, not, that are perpetrating the hate, not only through criminal charges, but we're going to start pursuing civil actions. We have a number of lawsuits that are lined up. We represent the family of the 6-year-old and the mom of the 6-year-old that was stabbed in Chicago with attorney Ben Crump, and hope to file a again, a civil lawsuit against the person that stabbed him and killed him. We have a number of other civil actions and civil lawsuits lined up because we got to, in this country, you have to send a message. And if we can make people pay, hopefully that's a deterrent in the future. And then those that have been fired are also looking into legal actions. And it's time we get mature, and it's time we organize around taking advantage of, the civil court system we have here, holding people accountable, making them pay for their actions. Even though if they don't face criminal charges, let's at least put them through civil court and have them pay up and have them learn a lesson that they can't act this way and they can't target us this way.
Abed Ayoub, Executive Director of the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee, thank you so much for giving us some of your time
both.
here in the Freedom Side.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Take care.
Oh, Eugene, it's really, outrageous that on top of like what you have to deal with from all these American officials inciting this hatred, you have this entire pro-Israel lobbying apparatus that is, like Abed mentioned, very, very well funded and is committed to silencing and censoring and punishing Arab and Muslim Americans for speaking up for their people in the midst of a genocide.
Yes.